Hello, my name is Holly Stein, and like many of us, choosing just one special occasion was rather difficult. I decided to share an occasion that was more like a comedy of errors that ended in the best way possible. Today, I would like to tell you about the birth of my daughter, Emily Grace. 5 years after a battle with infertility, my husband and I found out we were pregnant. At our first ultrasound, we discovered we were 8 weeks pregnant, and everything was perfect. The baby was measuring fine, and I was in fantastic health. And that was the theme until we hit 20 weeks. At 20 weeks pregnant, halfway through, I became very sick with the norovirus that had been going through the hospital that year. I ended up having severe vomiting and severe water loss, which landed me in the hospital with severe dehydration. And I was there overnight. That would not have been a problem, except at the next week, my follow-up ultrasound, we found out that my cervix had shortened. Now, the cervix is the part of the membrane that holds the baby in the body, and it had shortened to a very dangerous level. So I was taken out of work on bed rest and close monitoring for 3 weeks. The doctors were not sure if I would hold the baby past 30 weeks. So after that 3 weeks and no changes on ultrasound, the doctors felt that I was safe to go back to work under restrictions and just to be careful. So all went well. Until a few weeks later, at 30 weeks, I was in my first car accident ever. I was on my way home from Winston-Salem, North Carolina to Wilmington, North Carolina. And I hydroplaned going 65 miles an hour on I-40, and I hit a tree going backwards. I ended up at Moses Cone Hospital, where I was put on intense monitoring again, and I had the longest ultrasound of my life. But in the end, thank the good Lord above, everything was fine. I was out of work for another week, but the baby was safe, and that was all that mattered. Everything from that point on went smoothly. At 39 weeks, I had my last ultrasound just to make sure everything looked good, and the doctors were pleased that the baby was still inside, was doing well, and told me that whenever she wanted to come, she could. So 39 weeks and 4 days, I was on my way to the refrigerator at 2 o'clock in the morning to get a bottle of water when my own water broke. Now this would have been very exciting, except for a few snafus. Snafu number 1. Tropical Storm Nicole was in full force at that time. Now I don't know if you remember Tropical Storm Nicole at 2010, but it was a pretty intense tropical storm, and we suffered from high winds and lots of rain. Snafu number 2. My husband was unable to leave work because he was the supervisor in charge at the nursing home that he worked in, and he would have lost his job if he had just left, and nobody would come in for him. Snafu number 3. All of my family was in Winston-Salem, and my poor mother had prepped for a procedure the following day. So how many pregnant women have to drive themselves to the hospital? This girl. And so I did, and the only 5 minutes it did not rain that whole time, that whole night, was the 5 minutes it took me to get from my front door to the front door of the hospital. And the icing on the cake was the doctor who was on call that night was not my favorite doctor in the practice. But in the end, everything turned out the way it should. My husband arrived at 8:30 the following morning. My parents and my sister were on their way down, albeit slowly and safely. My primary OB had signed on at 7 a.m. that morning, and the RN who had me that day was a friend of mine from work. So at 9 a.m., I told my husband, get the nurse, it's time to get this baby out. And the nurse came in, and she checked me, and she said, now, Holly, we're going to wait an hour and let this baby come down a little bit. And I looked at her and I said, are you kidding? But we did. We waited an hour. My friend knew what she was talking about. But at 10 o'clock, I looked at my husband and I said, get that nurse in here now. And he did. And I pushed for 23 minutes. And at 10:23 that morning, my daughter, Emily Grace, entered the world. So in conclusion, Emily is now 5 years old and one of our greatest blessings. She is our testament that just because things don't go the way we think they will, and we plan that they will, and that we hope that they will, does not mean that they do not go the way they are meant to. Thank you.